Thanks everybody again for joining. And this is Jeff with Sockeye, and I've got Dom as well. I'll let Dom maybe introduce himself when we get to the end of just these few slides. But I know maybe for some of you guys, this is the first time being on a webinar with Sockeye for our property manager customers today. So I just wanted to have this slide up here. I won't talk through all the bullets, but just give everybody a little background in case they weren't aware, of who Sockeye was and how long Sockeye's been around. I know the folks on here today have been a Skyline customer, many of the folks for many, many years, and either worked with John or Pat or myself over the years. But just a little bit over a year ago, we sold Skyline to Sockeye, and Sockeye is a company that has focused on the Intacct product for many years before Sage actually acquired Intacct. And so that's been a focus for them, and also a focus in the construction space like Skyline, but they didn't have some of the, our legacy products like our Sage 100 Contractor or Sage 300. And so we've joined their team, and it's been a great ride. It's a great company to work for. And it's Intacct is what we call a premier partner, only a handful of one of premier partners in the country for Sage. And so we're happy to have everybody join us today and see the, I guess I'll call it the kickoff for us. I think Sage might be doing a webinar and announcement, but I know for us, it's the first time to be showing the real estate application. And Dom, our presenter today, is one of the guys who's been heavily involved in that product. And Dom knows the Sage 300 property management module in and out. And so he'll be doing the presentation, but just two slides here, just to kind of talk about a little bit of historical perspective. I know many of you folks have been with us for a while, but to kind of go back on the left side, we've had the Timberline product, legacy product, and then we got renamed over the years to Sage 300 Construction and Real Estate, and we've had our other construction solution, the Sage 100 Contractor. And I know none of the folks on here today use that product because everybody on here uses the property management module. But Sage came out, acquired Sage Intacct a few years back. Intact's been around since 2000. They were actually one of the first cloud accounting solutions. So they've been around a long time, and was a strategic decision by Sage to acquire the Intacct product. And we've all been very excited about it. And many of our customers without property management have started migrating to the Sage Intacct cloud solution. And now we're happy to be able to introduce the real estate side of that as well. So this one slide here kind of talks about, I guess, a little bit of shows of Intacct. And, we are, the Intacct product sits over on the right. It's what we call a multi-tenant cloud. So a true cloud solution written for the cloud, from the ground up. All of the users that are on Sage Intacct, whether they be in the construction or real estate, we're also in many other verticals. There's about 25,000 companies with hundreds of thousands of users that use the Sage Intacct today. But everybody's on the product, the same solution. We release 4 times a year. And so the second week of the second month of the quarter. So actually this Friday the May release is coming out. There's always pretty feature rich, something that we like to see that we maybe not all have not seen so much over the last several years. And the Sage 300 sits over on the left over there, the on-premise, of course, as you guys know, and then many of our customers and some of you guys on here today might also, kind of take that middle approach there where you're hosting with us or with somebody else and still have your on-premise software, but kind of a hybrid of being up in the cloud. But with that kind of laying the foundation a little bit, I'm going to introduce Dom, and we'll spend the majority of the time in the software today. And I will, if you have questions during the presentation, please ask them through the chat panel. I'll keep an eye on that, Dom, to see if any questions come up there. And I'm going to stop sharing and let you introduce yourself and take it away.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff. I really appreciate it. Very nice to meet everybody. Don Purney with Ethos Systems. My background is not sales and marketing. My background's accounting. I used to be the controller for a real estate development company a number of years ago. As Jeff had mentioned, I do know my way around the Sage 300 CRE product fairly well. Kind of been at it since the beginning. And like most people, was really excited that we could work with Sage to offer the real estate product on the Intacct platform. So Jeff did a really nice job of introducing what Intacct is, truly multi-tenant SaaS-based accounting solution, the only one endorsed by the AICPA, has a tremendous reputation in the market, extremely solid from a financial reporting perspective. And I was excited for us to be able to leverage upon that with the real estate product. So let me take a minute here and take you through what we'd like to see. And this should work quite well. Okay, great. So at this point, we've just got our first slide here to talk about what we're going to cover today. Sage Intacct Real Estate, we will give you an overview. We're going to discuss in detail lease management. I think that was one of the most important features within the Sage 300 CRE product, and why it was important to me to make sure that we preserved that feature as we move to Intacct. We've got our early adopter program, which starts on Monday. That means that, you know, the product is fully released and operational. And from here, you can actually purchase the product, and we'll take you through that. We'll also talk about what's coming in our next releases of the product. As Jeff mentioned, this is very different than your typical Sage release schedule. It is every quarter. So our next release will be in August, and then again in November, and then in February, and they just keep coming. So we'll cover those future release highlights and what things will be part of those releases as well. All right, we're going to go through a detailed product presentation here today. And what you're going to see is really all of these different facets within the product. So we'll go through and we'll talk about setup of a property, a unit, a tenant, and then a lease. So if you're not familiar with the 300 CRE product, one of the most important features in there is the fact that it is truly lease-based. And what that means is that a lot of systems out there have a property that you section into units, and then you move tenants in and out of those units. That doesn't always work well, because whether you're in a commercial or residential environment, it's not always that the relationship between a tenant and a unit is one-to-one. In fact, in a lot of cases, you may have one space with multiple tenants or one tenant with multiple spaces. And so what we wanted to do in Sage Intacct Real Estate was preserve that functionality that we had in 300 CRE. And the ability there is to then have a property, section it into units, have tenants as a separate database, and draw them together with the lease. This allows us to do that one to many, many to one, or even many to many relationships that we need to do. You know, in a post-COVID world, a lot of the central business districts in the continental United States have more sublease space available than they have at any other point in time. And so the reason I mention that here as part of a lease-based system is because as a property manager or as a property owner, it's important for me to know who signed on for that lease, who's the guarantor of that lease. But it's also can be just as important to know who my sublease tenant is. So by having a lease-based structure, now what I'm able to do is to have my primary tenant, who's my guarantor, and probably still responsible for a portion of the rent, maybe even a significant portion, and my sublease tenant. I can choose to just keep the sublease tenant information there, just so it's something we have on our rent rolls and reports and contact info, or I can actually bill the sublease tenant and record payments from them as well. So now I can easily have two tenants in one space or in multiple spaces, if the case may be. So that's one of the reasons why we like to highlight that we're truly lease-based, lease-focused. You know, I truly believe in real estate, we are administering those contracts, those lease documents, and it's really important that we capture those in detail. So we'll go through that and show you exactly how that works in the product. We're actually going to go ahead and start right here with it now. So you should be seeing my screen that says Sage Intacct up at the top. And what I'm going to do is, because we are truly web-based, fully multi-tenant, I'm going to make my fonts a little bigger here so it's a little bit easier to read. And what you'll notice here is it talks about our latest release information. It's got our help center. It's got our release calendar and our release notes right here from my help screen. We also have resources right into our Intacct help and into the learning center as well. Now, we're going to talk about dashboards at the end, but please be aware there are very detailed dashboards functionality available within the product. So I'm gonna spend our time today in the meat of the product so you can see exactly what it looks like and how it works. But please be aware from a dashboarding perspective and reporting perspective, there's a whole suite available from that perspective. So I click on my main menu and I have a task menu. That's where I kind of do my day in, day out features within the product. And then setup is where I actually establish those pieces of the database inside the system. So I'm first going to just simply look at properties. And what you'll notice is I now get a list of 3 properties that I have here within my database. I can sort or filter based upon the different columns that are listed up at the top. So it's easy for me to kind of look for what information I might be after. If I want to view information, notice there is a view capability in here. I can allow people through security to have rights to see it, but not actually change it. If I hit edit, now I have full edit capability within here. And the way the screen is organized is we've got different information that we look for up at the top. And then of course, whenever I highlight one of these, I've got all the details related to that page right here. Now, as you notice, I'm at 133%, so I have to scroll quite a bit. If I go to 100%, I see much more of the data on the screen. We'll take that back to the 133 just so it's easy to see on your monitors here through Zoom. So the first thing it says is what's our property name and what entity do we talk to? So what this is referring to is inside Sage Intacct, I establish all of my entities, and now this gives me the ability to pull that information up in here. So you can establish the entities inside Sage Intacct, pull them up, put in the property in here. It is worth noting that Intacct is a very comprehensive, as I mentioned earlier, general ledger that utilizes dimension-based reporting. So every transaction gets tagged with a series of dimensions or information. So as an example, we're going to certainly have the entity that's tagged to a transaction. The property will be tagged to it. The tenant will be tagged to it. And even the lease will be tagged to it. Now, why is that important to you? The reason that's important to you is because then you can actually go in and look at financial reporting at any one of those levels. So I can look at it by tenant. I can look at it by lease if I have a tenant that has multiple leases, or certainly by property or by entity. And as you layer in the job costing piece, you can also then look at it by job and cost code and cost type across all transactions. So imagine you're looking at a general ledger for the year, and you might say, well, show me where the tenant is so-and-so. And all of the transactions related to that tenant instantly report for us in a very summarized fashion, almost like a cash flow or a P&L, or like a detailed ledger, if that's what we'd like to see. And we'll show you some of that as we get further along here. But it's very important to be aware of that. Then we've got what type of property is it? What's the current interest rate we're paying if we have to pay interest on security deposits? The number of units, units occupied, units leased, the system will go ahead and update that for us automatically. The last time we ran our scheduled charges, what's our current period end date, what's our fiscal year end date. And whenever we look at a rent roll, when we look at rentable square feet, do we want to see those charges on a monthly or on an annualized basis? On the West Coast, which I'm assuming most of you are on the West Coast, you're quoting rent on a per foot per month basis. The rest of the country is doing it on a per month annual basis. And then how do we want to track occupancy? Do we want to do it based upon when the space is occupied or leased? And then if it's based upon occupancy, is it when the lease starts or when they first take the space to when they vacate the space and so on?
Hey,
So that's
Don, there's a question that came up about, is the entity similar to the parent company in Sage 300 or the actual company set up in Sage 300? And I'm not quite sure how to take that, but I'll take a stab. So just, if the question is regarding, are you still using Sage 300 along with this property management module? The answer is no. A Sage Intacct is a 100% cloud solution with the general ledger and the accounts receivable module that Don was kind of referring to. So it's a move from upgrade from Sage 300 to Sage Intacct, where everything for your company is financial wise and property management wise is all up in the cloud. Hopefully I took that correct. The person that asked that can correct me or define it further if I got that one wrong.
Fair enough, Jeff. Great, thanks. And obviously, yeah, as questions come in, just stop me at any point. Then we've got basic address information about the property, pulled from a list of different address types and so on. Very similar to what you had in 300. Square footages, what types of square footage do we want to track? What are their values? What are their as of dates? So as we have common areas change, we might have rentable square feet change. So we might have a new denominator whenever we're calculating our CAM or operating expense or property tax recoveries. And then we see our charge controls. So our charge controls are how we begin to interface with the general ledger. If you're on 300 today, the term is charge type. Same idea here. So the idea is to identify what items we have that we actually want to allow this property to bill for. And then inside the accounts receivable module, we will actually have a spot to track each of those items and identify what general ledger accounts they're hitting. So what's nice about this is that if you have a property manager or someone in operations abstract the lease and put the data in here, they don't have to know the chart of accounts. The system will allow them to utilize the item IDs, and then it's up to accounting inside the accounts receivable module to make sure that the appropriate general ledger accounts have been identified so that the journal entries are done in a correct fashion. So we identify that information. Very simple to go in and add additional ones. So if I wanted to add rent concession, I can easily add it here, tell it if it's subject to late fees or if it's part of GPR, whatever the case may be. And then security deposits, what types of deposits do we have? Is it refundable? What interest rates do we use? How often does it compound? And then what's our interest expense account? Now notice in here, it shows the account number. I can just begin to type interest expense and the system finds it for me inside the GL. So I don't have to know the GL chart of accounts. I can just begin to type it and it will find it for me in here. Okay. Late fees. How do we want to go in and bill late fees? So in this case here, I've told it that we actually want to bill a fee that is done monthly, and it's the greater of $50 or 8% of their total balance of any delinquent charges that they have. So it's identified those here. And I can add multiple fees on if that's what I'd like to. In this case, we don't need two fees that are the same, so we'll delete the one out there. And I can identify that. Now, management fees. How do we want to calculate management fees? We can tell it here, when do we start it? and we need to end it. So if for some reason we lose the management contract or we sell the property, I can put a termination date on here so it would know to no longer calculate the management fee. And then I've told it it's based upon a formula of all gross potential rent payments. It could be all payments, so on and so forth, or user definable. And then I tell it to take that amount, and let's take 100% of that total, and I want to take 4.5% of those gross potential rent payments when calculating my management fee. You'll also see that we do allow you to put in here a base amount, a minimum amount, and a cap if needed as well. Then we identify who's the accounts payable vendor. And once again, all I have to do is type the name of the vendor and it finds it for me there. Okay. All right. So we've identified that. We can then utilize the checklist feature. The checklist feature is something that we've held over from 300. I'll talk about that under future enhancements because we've replicated what was in 300 CRE, but we're going to expand upon it here as we go forward. And I'll explain some of that as we go. But the idea here is anytime a new lease is started, what things should happen, or whenever a lease is terminated, what things should happen. And then those copy over to my lease as I build it. And then we're also going to track real estate tax and insurance information. One other thing to note up here at the top, notice we have a save button, a duplicate button, and cancel. So this duplicate button is going to be everywhere. It's going to be within properties, units, tenants, and leases. So what we're able to do is easily duplicate all of the information that we have and then edit it to make sure that it works for that. The best example is setting up units. So if I've got a property that's got 15 units or so, I can set up one unit, duplicate it 14 times, make my adjustments, and I've got all of that information established in the system. I'm going to pause for a second. Jeff, any additional questions?
None quite
No.
yet.
Okay, just wanted to make sure. I don't want to breeze past anybody that might have a question. And with the view I'm seeing, I don't see questions popping up. Okay, great. So I'll go ahead and we'll go ahead and move on here, go to setup and go to units. And now same type of list view where it shows all the units within the system. Of course, if I hit edit, it's going to bring up the information about that unit. So we've set up our property. Now we've got our unit. Within the unit, we just identify what the unit name is, which I can change at any point in time. Very simple, very easy to do. What type of unit is it? The address information, what floor it's on, and then market rent and square footage. So the square footage becomes very important when trying to automate the recoveries for CAM, tax, operating expense, insurance, and so on. So we identify all of that information here as well. As I mentioned, if I hit duplicate, notice it just copies everything over. And now I might go in and say, well, this is suite 1600, which happens to be a full floor as well. So I can easily come in here and identify that, change the floor from 15 to 16, and go to my square footage, make any adjustments here as needed. We probably don't need to put decimal places on square footage. Sorry, that's the accountant in me. And now we'll update our rentable square feet. Notice it's the minute I blank out a field that the system needs, it lets me know that it's required. And if I'm not on that tab, it highlights that tab in red so that I'm aware that I'm missing something. So that allows me to easily update that and hit save. So now we've added that additional unit here and we get our green box up here to let me know that that's happened. So if we continue along, the next thing we typically look at is tenants. And tenants are really just contact info. That's really all they are, because really the property's got a lot of detail. The unit tells us about the specific space that's being rented. And then the tenant is just the contact info. We'll use the lease to bring it all together and put all the different lease provisions in that we might need. So we track our contact info here, and now I go into my task menu, go to manage leases and leases. Now it brings up my leases. Once again, I can filter or sort on anything. We bring up our lease, and it's got what property is it, what's the lessee name, and who's our tenant. And if I need to add an additional tenant in, it's easy enough for me to go through and do this. And I can add that additional tenant in here just that simply, just that easily. Okay. Same thing if I wanted to add additional space on, I can easily do that too. Okay. When did the lease start? When does it end? And what's our move-in date? Any documents that we want to add in here? So I have the ability here to go through and add any details in that I'd like that I want to upload into the system. So I can go ahead and drop that in. Until that happens, I apologize for that. That's something I'll have to look at to figure out why. So we go in and we can add our documents in as we just seen, and then our recurring charges. So in our recurring charges, we identify all of those types of charges that we want to go through and track. So the type of charge, the space that it's for, what is the amount? So I can build in my full rent schedule here as I'd like to along it. And this one's my CAM charge. Who do we bill? The next date it's due to be billed, the termination date, and here I can build all of my recovery settings. So I can tell it we bill this once a year, and we're going to do it for 2022. And what expenses do we want to do it for? Well, maybe I want to create a category of repairs. Are they varied, or are they fixed with occupancy, or do they vary with occupancy? So if we're going through a lease up phase, can I gross these expenses up or not? Are they subject to an admin fee? What square footage should we use for the tenant, for the unit, and for the property? Or I can put in a manual percentage. And then I simply just tell it what GL accounts to use. So I can just go in and add all of the different items that I'd like in here and add those that way. Pretty simple, pretty easy to do. If I want to add utilities, I do the same thing next. And then I tell it in here all the different important items related to that recovery. Do I have a base year? What's the amount? A stop, a cap. Are those dollar amounts or dollars per square foot amounts? And so on. So we identify all of that information here at the lease level. Now, one thing that we're able to do is we are able to build a recovery template. So you can build a whole series of templates. And then when you're in a lease, copy that template over if that's what you'd like to do. So then you don't have to go through the steps I just did to add in all of that detailed recovery information. Okay. Late fees, which we talked about, checklist. So as I mentioned here, we're going to enhance this capability. So right now, we track what the step is, when it was supposed to be completed, and when it was actually completed. We will be integrating this with the contact database that exists inside Sage Intacct today. And the reason we want to do that is Sage Intacct has a very nice feature called Smart Rules and Smart Events. Those are your automated email notifications that you're able to get from the system. So that will allow us, when we assign this to somebody, to automatically email them to let them know they've got this item that's due to be done. Here's when it's expected to be completed. So it kind of automates that piece for us. Then we've got our security deposit for this particular lease, any insurance information, So if we want to track that they have general liability and who's it with, what's their policy number, as you can see, who's the agent. Their phone number. When does it go into effect? And when does it expire? And then the insurance values. And identify that information in there. Now, what's nice about this is with smart rules and smart events, we can have the system notify you. You get to determine 30 days, 45 days, whatever, prior to the expiration of this certificate of insurance. And we can notify the tenant because we have their email address inside our tenant information. Okay. And then option information. This one has a 5-year option to renew. We want the system to notify us on November 30th rather than create a formula around this. Usually people want to be much more specific about options. So you can tell it, you tell the system exactly when to notify you, and then when does the option expire and what space is it for. And then we track that tenant email in case it's different from our contact email, and our property management email as well here with this. So that's where we establish everything about the lease, and it saves all of that for us. And now what we're able to do then is once we've got all of our lease information captured, now we can go under our task menu and we can generate our first of the month charges. So if I want to do this for May, so I will run it for everything that's due to be billed in May, and I'm going to put May 1 as my transaction date and my accounting date on it. I'm going to do it for that property 220 West Washington and hit generate preview charges. So now it goes ahead and actually shows me exactly what would be billed based upon those dates and how much it's ready to go ahead and generate that charge for. And then I can simply hit generate charges, and it sends that data over into the accounts receivable system for me. I'm going to pause for just a minute. Any questions or anything come up at this point, Jeff?
Nope, I think you've
Okay.
you've got everybody wowed at this point, Dom.
I guess we're covering it pretty well. So what we'll do then is we'll go in here and we'll open up the Intacct side and show you exactly what that looks like when that data comes through. Sorry, just so many different credentials to be saved. So now we've opened up, and this is real estate user testing, which is what I like to connect to. And if I go to accounts receivable, when I go to my tenants, there's the list of all my tenants that have been brought over. And if I go to my invoices, I can hit invoices, and here's all of the invoices that the system has brought over for me. And
John, there was a question around this. I know these all show posted on here, but the question was about, are you able to preview the charges before it posts and get over to this point over here?
So you preview them here inside real estate, and then when you generate, it sends them over. Now that does not mean that you cannot edit them. You do have full edit capability inside Intacct. If I go here into my into all of my real estate invoices that I see, I've got one here for Skyline Solutions. I'm not terribly creative, Jeff. And yes, I still use the name Skyline.
Me too. It's hard to not do that after 26 years. I get caught on that too. I have to put $1 in the cookie jar every time I say it, though.
There you go. So I can identify this here, and now I can make any changes to it that I need to. Notice it's property tax, common area rent, and it's got how much it's actually going to charge for each one of these. And when I go into the details, it's got all of the details related to it here. Who's my tenant? All of that tracked for me here. And I can make any changes to it that I need to. So if I decide we should not have billed $600, but we should have billed $750, I can identify that here. And then post and update all the way through.
And of course, yeah, just to add to that, Dom, that's all controlled by security, and Dom's an admin, so he can do anything, but not anybody. It's all based on security rules inside the solution.
That is correct. You're absolutely right. So we're going to preview them here inside real estate, generate them, but then from an accounting perspective, accounting, if they have the appropriate security level, excellent point, Jeff, they have the ability to come in here and edit those transactions as necessary. And when they do that, now, when we look back in property management and we look at our tenants, those balances update for us automatically. We're in the midst of as you may have noted from my slides earlier, our early adopter program goes into effect on Friday morning, May 13th. So we're in the midst of wiping a bunch of data. That's why you're seeing some differences here. But all of those balances get updated right here inside the real estate system. That is actively reading from the accounts receivable module in Intacct.
And hey, Dom, just to further expand on that last question, a follow-up to that was about being able to print a report to preview the charges. And that's going to have someone run the rent roll and then a manager review, and maybe talk about some of that capability.
Yeah, so at this point, that stuff comes to screen. If you want to generate it to a report, you can export that to PDF and email it around as you see fit. Okay, we'll continue on here. Next thing is management fees. So I can come in here and say, I want to run management fees. We'll run them for April. Let me do this. And the accounting date through the end of April as well. And hit preview. They don't know if I have any payments that I left posted. Oh, I do. Good. So it calculated it, and I have $1,500 ready to be charged for this. And notice once again, push this out to a PDF if I'd like to. Otherwise, I can hit generate management fees, and now it sends it over into the accounts payable system as a bill to be paid. And so now it lets us know that that's been sent over. And if we go to accounts payable, bills, I've got my I've got all my management fees brought over here. So same idea as well. All right, let's go back here. So we talked about property unit management. Okay, we'll talk about rent rolls and dashboards. So the idea here is, from a reports perspective, all of your accounts receivable reports will come from the accounts receivable module. So when I go into Intacct and go to accounts receivable, in here I've got my tenant ledger right here. I've got my agings here, invoice analysis. So if I want to see all the different types of billing that have happened, I can do that as well. And so on and so forth. And then obviously just a simple customer list along these ways. But it becomes very simple, very easy to do with any of these reports. You have the ability to come in and say what period you'd like to see. So whether you want to see last month, this month, next month, year to date, last year, year to date, inception to date, whatever the case may be, you can grab all of that in here, do it based upon a type of tenant or for a specific tenant or a range of tenants or for a given property. if that's what you'd like to do. So you have all that capability in here. And then of course, when I hit export, notice I can drop this right out to Excel. And what you'll notice here is, for those of you that have worked with Sage 300 CRE, this is a little different. When data gets thrown out to Excel, it's formatted correctly and shows all the details the way we'd like it to. So there's no additional formatting of data I need to do. This is a native dump into an Excel, into a true Excel file. It's not a CSV file, it's into a true Excel file. Okay, and I always think that's important to show people. Also in here, if I simply go in and say, show me a list of tenants, there's my full list. Notice I even have an export capability here. Now, if I wanted to do a CSV, I could, but if I want to take this right out to Excel, I can do that the right way. And there's everything dumped out that way for me. So the reporting capability is much enhanced from what we had in 300 CRE. We are in the midst of finishing building all of the detailed reports here. I can show you our rent roll report. I could pick which entity it's for, and then which property or properties, and as of what date I'd like to see that. And then once I've done that, I can then hit start, and it shows that property for me. In this case, I have 2 units. One's occupied, one's vacant. And I can just expand upon it and see exactly what those rental charges are, what are they per square foot, and an annual amount. And if there's another bump in rent coming, it shows me that as well. My vacant space will not have anything further to show because it is a vacant space. And I can dump this out to a PDF as well and email that around if that's what I'd like to do. So that's really how the system works. I mentioned that there's very nice dashboard capability. So as an example here, what I have is what we call performance cards up at the top. Rental income, how are we doing versus budget? AR, what has our change been versus last month? And cash versus last month. Then I show a list of each property that we have. Where's it at? What type is it? How many units? When did we acquire it? What investments have we made in it? And what are we holding in debt? The interest rate on that and who the lender is. Then I've got my simple rent roll here, which is just showing each unit, the tenant, the lease begin date, the lease end date, and what are we holding in security deposits, and what do we have in AR as well. I love this little waterfall report. It breaks out my total expenses of 1.3 million based upon different groups. So now I know I can easily recover marketing and G&A and utilities and taxes and things like that. It breaks all of the components of my expenses out by type. So it's easy for me to see that information that would typically be recoverable versus non-recoverable. And then we've got our income by property here as an example. Another way to look at this is this financial reporting dashboard. So notice it's got rent today versus last month. This is for a different set of properties. AR and cash. I can put in what date I want to see this on. So those performance cards and these reports, I can just choose as of what date or as of what property or as of what lease I'd like to see. And then see the result of that on all of my reports. And I feel it's going to change it quite a bit. Of course, I pick one where there's no data. Let me try this one.
Hey, I'll add to that, Dom, that I know for a lot of the folks that are on here today, this is their first time seeing Sage Intacct. So this dashboard that Dom's sitting on, it, if you look at the very top, he's got a pull down menu, and right now he's sitting in what we call the top level in Sage Intacct. So that means you as a user right now, you're looking at all of your properties on this particular report. And then what Dom just did was he drilled down on, he chose a specific property or a group of properties, whatever makes sense. It's completely flexible. But if you have property managers that work at some of your properties and not other ones, so when they log into Sage Intacct, they, for example, might only see the Timberline Development Company, and they might not see, you know, the other entities as well. So they can work in their entities. Some users can see groups of properties, and other folks are going to see the entire portfolio. So it's completely customizable. But the idea is that all of your data is in one, if you want to call it, master file, unlike in Sage 300 today. And we use dimensions to be able to slice and dice the data.
That's excellent point, Jeff. Yeah, you know, it's funny. I wasn't thinking that people had not seen Intacct at all. So I'm glad you pointed that out. Okay, so yeah, so as you can see here, now I can see cash flow, and all of these numbers are off because of the size of my fonts. Once I take my fonts down, you know, now I see net income or loss for the month versus the year, and then how that's made up, cash flow from operations, and it proves it right out to my ending cash balance. Then I've got my little balance sheet over here for each one. And exactly as Jeff had mentioned, if I only wanted to see this for a given entity or a specific property, I can easily do that. And I can pick what date I'd like to see it based upon. So the dashboarding capability is tremendous in here. You have a ton of flexibility from that perspective. All right, let's
go back. And for the folks that are, you know, one big difference in Intacct is the ability with any of these hyperlinks, anything in blue, like you would expect in a regular web browser, right? You can drill down all the way to the detail and where that transaction came from, unlike in Sage 300, where you might be using Information Assistant to report on something, and then you got to jump back out and go over to the transaction. In Intacct, it's very, very interactive.
Then I can even go to the actual source of the transaction as well and see all the detail. Yeah, excellent point, Jeff. Because you're right, for people who are used to 300, this is miles different. The reporting's so much easier. Okay. Let's continue on here. So release highlights, our early adopter, multi-tenant and multi-unit capability with all pertinent lease details and so on. Our next release will be adding additional functionality for deposit refunds. Management fees you see are already done and in there. Those are due to be done in the next couple of weeks. Management fees are already complete, but security deposit refunds. And we're going to be taking all of the property management reports, real estate reports, and delivering those via Tableau, which is a very robust dashboarding system as well. So that rent roll capability and so on, all of that will dramatically increase and improve. Then on August 22nd, we expect to remove the early adopter tag and go to full unconditional release. And we'll be adding in residential features. So for those of you that use 300 CRE, it never had a great functionality to do lease applications and credit checks and background checks and those things. We will be adding that capability in August this year. Then in November, we release all of the details around our recoverable expense charges. So you can capture all of that data today, but this will be releasing all the worksheet details. So whenever you want to send that detail to a given tenant and show them exactly how that calculation took place, and an invoice format, which is more like a letter to explain exactly what those charges are. And then in February, we will be enhancing our integration with the contact database so that we can take a variety of items, including those checklists, and enhance our smart rules and smart events capability. Okay, there was something else. Oh, one other thing to mention, with base Intacct functionality, we do have tenant portals already available. Utilizing a product out of the marketplace like VersaPay, you will be able to allow your tenants to get an invoice electronically, a rent statement electronically, have a pay now button on it, click it, and log them into a portal and record their payment via ACH through there, and so on. So those tenant portals for payments are available in first release. We will be enhancing that portal so that it has a spot for work requests for services and things like that. Okay.
That's a good point, Dom. And we at Sockeye, we use Sage Intacct for our internal accounting solutions. So some of the customers on here today may be using VersaPay. That's what we use at Sockeye. So if you're using VersaPay today to go in and see your invoices and set up credit card recurring payments and things, that's the tool that Dom's referring into. And
Exactly.
you kind of touched on the last question that came in, Don. One was about invoice disbursement, and can they go out? Obviously, we can print them by email, but yeah, you touched on the electronic part of VersaPay that will be coming. But yes, we also have the ability to email those out of the system today.
Yeah. So VersaPay is here today, and emailing of invoices is here today. Of course, you can always print and mail if you wanted to for some reason. All right. Well, that's kind of everything we have available in the system. We obviously welcome your feedback. If you're interested in our early adopter program, please reach out to Jeff, and he can get you, kind of set up for that.
Yeah, Dom, great presentation, and we had some good questions come in. And if other folks have questions that they want to reach out afterwards, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll do a follow-up. And if we need to drill down to do a follow-up presentation as well for a larger part of your team, we're happy to do that as well. So thanks, Dom. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Jeff. If you need me for any of those follow-up presentations, I'd be more than happy to do it.
Oh, I will. All
right. Okay. Sounds
right.
great.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.